All right, so tonight we have our last section, our last of the four quartets, Little Gidding. Um, and this is, I mean, in my mind, this is the highlight of 20th century poetry. Not a commonly shared opinion because, well, basically because 20th century poetic critics did not like T.S. Eliot converting to Christianity. So they did their best to try to explain why the four quartets was not as good as the Hollow Men or the Wasteland. I don't know how any fair critic can look at the poetry in the two and not say that four quartets is just uncontrovertibly better. But that's critics for you. Um, Still advertising for the upcoming 6-week course on natural and human law foundations of civil society with our director, Daniel Campbell. That begins the last week of July, and it'll be run at 4 separate times, morning and evening classes on both Tuesdays and Thursdays, and there will be video recordings. And again, there's a tuition credit for this. So if you plan to take a year-long course in the fall, whether it's biblical school, catechetical school, or enrichment courses, go ahead and sign up for this anyway, because you get the cost of registration applied to your year-long course. So it is essentially in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra, salve. Ad te clamamus, exules filii Eve, ad te suspiramus, gementes et flentes, in hoc lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo, advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordes oculos, ad nos converte. Et Iesum, benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc auxilium ostende. O clemens, O pia, O dulcis Virgo Maria. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So as we close 4 quartets, I figured I would finally post the epigraphs that appear in the printed edition. These are from the fragments of Heraclitus. Heraclitus was one of the Greek philosophers before Socrates. There's about 150 years of philosophy in Greece that occurs before Socrates shows up, and very little of that survives. Almost all of what we know of pre-Socrates, pre-Socratic philosophy appears in a few fragments here, but mostly in citations that Aristotle made. Aristotle, when he was disputing previous ideas, frequently would actually include the quotation. So that's what we know about some pre-Socratic philosophy. The first one is that although reason or wisdom is common to all, the many live as if they have a reason of their own. And the word that's used here is logos. So logos, that can be translated as wisdom. More frequently in philosophy means wisdom, but of course in the Christian tradition, the logos is the word. The beginning of St. John's Gospel, in the beginning there was the word. St. John says logos. This, of course, is long before St. John is writing his gospel, long before Christ, but it's that word that is so central to Greek thought, the logos. And that phrase, the many, In Greek, this is where the hoi polloi come from. The hoi polloi, it's one of those expressions that's gone out of usage, and I just don't think it should have. The great way of referring to the masses, the great unwashed. Oh, I guess we have those phrases now, and they're just a lot more biting. But the hoi polloi is used also by Christian writers um, to mean sometimes the many, but sometimes just all. Uh, in all of these pre-modern societies, you have a very small group of aristocrats that do basically all the writing, all the governing, and all the deciding, and all of the commoners, between 80 and 98% of any pre-modern society are just grouped together as everybody else, and in Greek they're the hoi polloi. Um, so although logos is common to all, that everybody has a share in or has the same access to reason or wisdom, everybody acts as though they have their own particular. And then the way up and the way down are one and the same. And that's something that's appeared throughout the poems. The way down, delving further into the darkness, and then the way up, the final ascension toward God. As used by Eliot. And one second here. I thought I included. Thought I just put in a slide that had a picture of the house. I'm sorry, not the house, the church. I'm going to bother to make a slide with the church. I'd like to find it. Oh, so Little Gidding is one of those tiny ancient farming villages. The last population census it had included, I think, 22 people. But it includes this church, St. John's Church, which has been a pilgrimage site for hundreds of years. Originally, it was built in the Middle Ages by the Knights Templar. Then Nicholas Ferrar restored it in 1628. And Nicholas Ferrar basically created what T.S. Eliot is trying to, he created in a living community what T.S. Eliot is trying to create in poetry. It was basically a lay community living as close to a monastic life as a lay community could. This is Church of England. It's only 100 years after Henry VIII has dissolved all the monasteries and basically outlawed that kind of monasticism. Nicholas Ferrar, with his family and friends, came together. There was a group of about 30 that wanted to live a communal life. Nicholas and a few others committed themselves to celibacy. Most of the married did not. But they lived a communal life that was based on morning, midday, and evening prayer, and focused on the Eucharist as the central point of devotion. Eliot visited this place in 1935. It's an incredibly plain church now. the church that Nicholas Ferrar restored was completely replaced by a new structure in 1714. And then that structure was restored and modified, restored in quotation marks. One of those restorations where they don't make it back what it originally was, but they decide to improve it. But this is the actual church that Eliot has in mind in this tiny, tiny village that is northwest of Cambridge, and is situated, as Eliot will describe here, behind a tiny little farm and a literal pigsty. So what we have tonight is Eliot bringing us to the place that he's been hinting at throughout the three previous quartets, those guesses and hints. We have the guesses and hints of eternal life, of existence with God, beatitude, that Eliot talked about last week. But he's also given us guesses and hints as to where this poem is going. So, little Gidding one. Midwinter spring is its own season, sempiternal through sodden towards sundown, though sodden towards sundown, suspended in time between pole and tropic. When the short day is brightest with frost and fire, the brief sun flames the ice on pond and ditches, in windless cold that is the heart's heat, reflecting in a watery mirror a glare that is blindness in the early afternoon. And glow more intense than blaze of branch or brazier stirs the dumb spirit. No wind, but Pentecostal fire in the dark time here. And Little Gidding is going to be the section in which fire is the dominant voice. The fire, air, earth, and water that are the four instruments that are playing in each of these quartets. Fire has the dominant role here, and not just fire, but Pentecostal fire. So for this one, I've changed the background image to the dove of the Holy Spirit, the flames, the tongues of fire, Pentecost, and fires that can either be infernal or purgatory. But all of that is to come. Between melting and freezing, the soul's sap quivers. There is no earth smell or smell of living thing. This is the springtime, but not in time's covenant. Now the hedgerow is blanched for an hour with transitory bloom of snow, a bloom more sudden than that of summer, neither budding nor fading, not in the scheme of generation. Where is the summer, the unimaginable zero summer? So midwinter spring. As we've had previously seasons, we had that autumn, I'm sorry, the Indian summer that was mentioned in Burt Norton, the summer that comes back in November. Here in midwinter, we have spring appearing. If you came this way, taking the route you would be likely to take, and by coming this way, he means to this church. Taking the route you would be likely to take, again, through countryside, through farms, into a tiny village. Places unknown to all except pilgrims. Taking the route you would be likely to take from the place you would be likely to come from. If you came this way in May time, you would find the hedges white again in May, with voluptuary sweetness. It would be the same at the end of the journey if you came at night like a broken king. And here we're going to pull on a bit of English history during the English Civil War of the 1640s, when the Puritan faction led by Cromwell overcame the Royalist faction and Charles I. And Charles I, after being defeated in the last disastrous battle for him, would end up being executed. And you would have a 10-year religious dictatorship of puritanical Cromwell, basically. After the last battle, Charles I came to Little Gidding. He came to the Church of St. John. If you came at night like a broken king, if you came by day not knowing what you came for, it would be the same. When you leave the rough road and turn behind the pigsty to the dull facade and the tombstone. Um, and we put the image up here just because it's so necessary. The dull facade, and of course the tombstone, those church cemeteries that Eliot's been mentioning, with of course the yew trees. And what you thought you came for is only a shell, a husk of meaning, from which the purpose breaks only when it is fulfilled, if at all. Either you had no purpose, or the purpose is beyond the end you figured, and is altered in fulfillment. And with these lines, Eliot is transforming us. This is all the if you came this way, you came the way everybody else took. And the individual journey in Little Gidding dissolves. Not that individuality dissolves, but the individuals turn into a we. It's everybody making this pilgrimage. And of course, the beauty of the sacramental worldview is that history is still very much with us. It is, in the lines of one of the commentators, not eternally present, but in the sacramental worldview, the past is eternal and present. Because the past meets with timelessness in those moments of sacrament the exact same way that the present does. So the person with the sacramental worldview experiences history completely different from the one who has a view of linear progression of time. The simple linear progression of time in which the past is past and no longer really affects us. Only an American could say history is bunk, as Henry Ford supposedly did. To anyone with the sacramental worldview, history is eternal and present because it is where the story of salvation history meets eternity. Through salvation history, secular history, human history meets eternity. And that meets eternity, it met eternity for the past the same way it meets us today. So for Eliot, we can, if you came in May, is the exact same as if you came like Charles I in 1646. If you came by day not knowing what you come for. And here we have the purpose behind our actions, the motives that we have. The idea of attachment that appeared before is the idea that we desire things out of our actions in the future. Much more so than we just desire reunion with God. We do things in the present, hoping to gain things for ourselves in the future. That idea of attachment is one that Eliot's attacked throughout all of this. And here we go beyond that to whatever your motive was for coming to St. John at Little Gidding in the first place. That was just a shell, a husk of meat from which the purpose breaks only when it is fulfilled, if at all. Either you had no purpose or the purpose is beyond the end that you figured. So the pilgrim, and we are all pilgrims. The pilgrim comes here either without a specific purpose in mind or a purpose that doesn't go nearly far enough, that the fulfillment, what we get out of this pilgrimage, what we experience is so much more than what we had intended. There are other places which also are the world's end, some at the sea jaws, as we saw last week in the Dry Salvages, or over a dark lake, in a desert, or in a city. But this is the nearest in place and time, now and in England. The other places which are the world's end, the other places in which this experience of eternity and time coming together so briefly in our experience. Other places this can happen, but this is the specific place. And let's not think that in this meeting of time and timelessness that is sacrament, there's never the disillusion, I'm sorry, the dissolving of individuality. We emerge from this, all of us pilgrims, as a we, but we're not a undefined mass of we, all yearning for God in the same way, or seeing God the same. We maintain our individuality. In fact, death, and this is where Eliot and Dante are in complete agreement, it is only the death of the body that reveals the pure individual. Only once all of the masks and fakery of human life are dissolved with death does the genuine, real individual fully come out in its absolute uniqueness. And in the same way, all of these places where eternity and time meet, they are all completely unique as well. And that's what Eliot's pointing to here, is wherever we are, the sea jaws, over a dark lake, in a desert, in a city. These moments of sacramental unity can happen anywhere. But right now, we're here at this church. We have a set place, we have a set time. We are right now, and we are in Little Gidding in England. If you came this way, taking any route, starting from anywhere, at any time or at any season, it would always be the same. So the individual experiences that he mentioned, if you came this way previously, are becoming more generalized in the sense that their differences don't matter because the experience would always be the same. You would have to put off sense and notion. You are not here to verify, instruct yourself, or inform curiosity or carry report. You are here to kneel, where prayer has been vowed. So all of the desires of modernity to verify some fact, to instruct yourself on some self-help mission, to inform curiosity, simply to have experience of the world, or carry a report back to the ones at home. That's not why you come to this church. You come here to kneel as a supplicant in prayer. Here, where prayer has been valid, where communities fostered prayer over centuries. And prayer is more than an order of words, the conscious occupation of the praying mind, or the sound of the voice praying. And what the dead had no speech for while living, when living, they can tell you, being dead. The communication of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living. Here, the intersection of the timeless moment is England and nowhere, never and always. So what is prayer? More than just reciting something, more than consciously focusing on something as we pray, more than the sound of the voice that prays. Prayer itself is sacramental. In connecting with God through prayer, we are connecting the time and the timeless, the here and now, with eternity. And what the dead had no speech for, and again here, the Catholic worldview, the sacramental worldview that honors the dead in an exalted manner. Everything in bodily earthly life that prevents that distillation of our pure individuality, that we're all created as utterly unique individuals by God, with a particular part in salvation history. That God doesn't just give us individual, unique personalities, bodies, etc., but puts us in a totally unique context as well, in time and place, and therefore places us at a particular point, in a particular point in time and space in salvation history. But all of that gets muddled in bodily life is purified through death. And the dead now can tell us what they could not articulate while living. The communication of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living. Here, the intersection of the timeless moment is England and nowhere, never and always. And then part two, we move into a more lyric piece that, as always, plays with the ideas that were just put forth in the first movie. Ash on an old man's sleeve is all the ash the burnt roses leave. Dust in the air suspended marks the place where a story ended. Dust inbreathed was a house, the walls, the wainscot, and the mouse. The death of hope and despair. This is the death of air. There the flood and drouth over the eyes and in the mouth, dead water and dead sand contending for the upper hand. The parched eviscerate soil gapes at the vanity of toil, laughs without mirth. This is the death of earth. Water and fire succeed the town, the pasture, and the weed. Water and fire deride the sacrifice that we denied. Water and fire shall rot the marred foundations we forgot of sanctuary and choir. This is the death of water and fire. So the four elements come again, and the water and fire succeeding everything else. This is the end of history, the apocalypse, that both in the classical Greek and Roman traditions and the Norse traditions as well, human history ends with a great apocalypse. The world is destroyed by water and then fire. And here we have water and fire, the town, the pasture, and the weed. It destroys everything that we had. And the death of air in the first stanza here. The ash on an old man's cigar ash is the same as the ash of the burnt roses. The roses, the symbol of life, of purity. The roses that were dried in a bowl in the first quartet, Burnt Norton. They will leave the same ash as the cigar that ashes on the old man's sleeve. The dust that was where a story ended, the walls, the wainscot, and the mouse. References here to both Burnt Norton and East Coker. And here, dead water and dead sand. The dead water is important because, of course, it is the dead water, not the living, not the water that Christ promised the Samaritan woman at the well in Shechem, but the dead water here. The water that floods and kills, and the earth that is parched and laughs at the futility of man's attempt to wrest goodness, crop from it. So we have the death of the elements here. And then we move on into just a remarkable bit here. The second parts are always like this. They start off with something, with a brief little metrical lyric, and then they move on into something that is more in the style of Eliot's ordinary poetry, not as fixed. Here, Eliot's going to be writing in terza rima, that is in tercets, not in terza rima, but in tercets. Um, and you cannot write in tercets without recalling Dante. And here, Eliot will recall Dante. He paints a picture here of the hour before dawn. And what he's thinking of here is when he was the air raid boy and he's walking the streets of London, looking for fires. And this is the German Blitz of London, where every night for months on end, the bombers come in, hit what they can. The patrols do the best they can to spot the fires, to put them out. And this was Eliot's role throughout the entire German Blitz. Night after night, going out, and London's completely blacked out during this. All the lights are put out so that you're not helping the Germans identify, where houses are, where structures are, that they have to do it as best they can in the blindness. So you have the combination of the dark, of fire, of so many things that Eliot's been pulling on in the four quartets. And if you've read the Divine Comedy, and you remember Inferno 15, where Dante meets one of his earlier masters, Brunetto Latini, in the sterile sands of the Seventh Circle. That's what this is based upon. And he won't name that forgotten master as Dante, but we're going to run with Dante. It's possible other poetic impulse or poetic sources for Eliot are at play here, but we'll go with the voice being Dante. In the uncertain hour before the morning, near the ending of the interminable night, at the recurrent end of the unending, after the dark dove with the flickering tongue had passed below the horizon of his homing, while the dead leaves still rattled on like tin over the asphalt, where no other sound was, between three districts whence the smoke arose, I met one walking, loitering and hurried, as if blown towards me like the metal leaves before the urban dawn wind, unresisting. So again, the uncertain hour before morning, the last hour of the watch. The dark dove with the flickering tongue. Here he's referring to the German planes. The bombers are also accompanied by fighters. The fighters trying to shoot down any British planes that are trying to intercept the bombers. So the dark dove with the flickering tongue begins as the German Messerschmitts and the what you see from their machine gun fire, the tongues of fire on the dark dove, which is why I selected the image I was able to find in the background. And that, of course, will transform into the dove that is the Holy Spirit and the tongues of fire on Pentecost. The three districts whence smoke arose, and literally in London, different districts of the city that were hit by bombs. But if we're meeting Dante, three districts whence smoke arose, probably referring also to Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradiso. And as I fixed upon the downturned face, that pointed scrutiny with which we challenged the first met stranger in the waning dusk. And here is referring to Dante's lines in Inferno 15, that Brunetto Latini and his companions peer at Dante with the way that Dante says the old tailor squints at the needle that he's trying to thread, that squint at dusk when the light is fading. But of course, the dusk is in Dante. It's pre-dawn or dawn's hour in Eliot. I caught the sudden look of some dead master, whom I had known, forgotten, half recalled, both one and many. So some dead master, both one and many, primarily Dante, but also his other influences. In the brown baked features, the eyes of a familiar compound ghost, both intimate and unidentifiable. So I assumed a double part. Um, and so Eliot's making clear that, I mean, he's conjuring up this apparition, that the apparition that speaks is based on Dante, but it's Eliot's voice as Dante. So I assumed a double part and cried, and heard another's voice cry, "What, are you here?" And when Dante recognizes Brunetto Latini, "Voi siete qui," are you here? Is his question for him. Although we were not. I was still the same, knowing myself, yet being someone other, and he a face still for me. That delightful, "Are you here?" although we were not. Yet the words sufficed to compel the recognition they preceded. And so, compliant to the common wind, too strange to each other for misunderstanding, in concord at this intersection time of meeting nowhere, no before and after, we trod the pavement in a dead patrol. I said, "The wonder that I feel is easy, yet ease is cause of wonder. Therefore speak, I may not comprehend, may not remember." And and this is just Eliot at some of his most brilliant, conjuring up the master of poetry to ask him questions. And of course, for brilliant poets, what you get will absolutely not be what you're expecting as a reader. And I am not eager to rehearse my thoughts and theory, which you have forgotten. These things have served their purpose. Let them be. So with your own, and pray they be forgiven by others, as I pray you to forgive both bad and good. Last season's fruit is eaten, and the fulfilled beast shall kick the empty pail. So the reflection upon poetry that is important, that is significant, but on another level is utterly meaningless. So Dante has no thoughts of poetic theory, which has already been forgotten. Not because it doesn't matter, but because in the larger scheme, it served its purpose. Let it be. Let the past be past. Don't try to pull the past into the present. The past exists in a different way. Allow it to exist that way. So with your own. So with Eliot's own poetry. And this, in fact, would be the last poem that Eliot writes. He lived on for another 20 years after this, but this is the end of his poetry. And pray they be forgiven by others, as I pray you to forgive both bad and good. So what should be Eliot's source of pride as a poet, when we view it sub specie aeternitatis, when we view it from the aspect of eternity, even the four quartets, even the Divine Comedy, is something that its authors are something the authors need to pray be forgiven. Even the greatest work of the poet falls short from the standpoint of eternity. Last season's fruit is eaten, and the fulfilled beast shall kick the empty pail. What a way to refer to the Divine Comedy and likewise the four quartets, just last season's fruit that's been eaten by the beast, and now the pail is empty and is kicked over. For last year's words belong to last year's language, and next year's words await another. But as the passage now presents no hindrance to the spirit unappeased and peregrine, that is pilgrim, between two worlds become much like each other. So I find words I never thought to speak in streets I never thought I should revisit when I left my body on a distant shore. Since our concern was speech, and speech impelled us to purify the dialect of the tribe and urge the mind to aftersight and foresight. And so here is the importance of the poet. That speech is how we have community. Communication and community, of course, from the same stem. And the poet's role in any community is to purify speech. There's nothing new for the poet to express. That's what Eliot has said. But to express the ancient wisdom in terms that allow people in the present day access to that wisdom, the ability to express their own thought better. And certainly that is the role historically when you look at languages and poets, is that the great poets are copied by everybody who lives after them, and not just other poets. But the phrases that Dante wrote became phrases in Italian. How many phrases of Shakespeare are still used in English? And I fear we're losing this in the last 60 years, practically since the four quartets. How many poets do we have purifying English, having a positive influence on the language? Whose phrases are able to morph themselves into the spoken vernacular and improve it, and urge the mind to aftersight and foresight. And this is what is completely lost in modernism. That modernism that Eliot founds and rejects is completely self-referential. That the past and future don't exist to the modernist viewpoint at all. But to the Christianity that Eliot accepts, the past and future are so incredibly connected, because they relate to eternity in the same way that we do. So we have to acknowledge the past and the future. And so we have to urge the mind to aftersight and foresight. Let me disclose the gift reserved for age. And here we have to think back to an earlier part too, in which Eliot said, do not let me hear of the wisdom of old men, but of their folly, of their fear of fear, their fear of possession, their fear of being possessed, their fear of God. Here we have the answer to that. Let me disclose the gift reserved for age to set a crown upon your lifetime's effort. And here, what is done in a way that is just so brilliant, that reflects well on Dante, who he's learned this lesson from. We have Eliot offering the own assessment of his work through the mouth that he is, through the words he's penning in the mouth of a poet that he admires beyond all others. And it'll be, of course, a negative assessment. First, the cold friction of expiring sense without enchantment, offering no promise, but bitter tastelessness of shallow fruit as body and soul begin to fall asunder. Second, the conscious impotence of rage at human folly, and the laceration of laughter at what ceases to amuse. And last, the rending pain of reenactment of all you have done and been, the shame of motives late revealed, and the awareness of things ill done and done to others harm, which once you took for exercise of virtue. Then the fool's approval stings and honor stains. From wrong to wrong, the exasperated spirit proceeds, unless restored by that refining fire, where you must move in measure like a dancer. The day was breaking. In the disfigured street he left me with a kind of valediction, and faded on the blowing of the horn. So the gifts of age. First, the cold friction of expiring sense without enchantment, as body and soul begin to fall asunder. The approaching death, the approach of death. That sort of finally pulls back the curtain on any illusion we might have left, offering no promise but bitter tastelessness of shadow fruit. Second, the conscious impotence of rage at human folly. The man growing old, seeing the folly around him that he's powerless to do anything about, which of course consumed Dante. And Eliot acknowledges this as well. The laceration of laughter, what ceases to amuse. Is there anything more obnoxious than the laughter, the comedy other people find in things that are no longer funny to us? When we've matured beyond something and everyone else hasn't. So first we have the removal of any false joys that we might have taken, that the approach of death disillusions us of. Then the ability to recognize human folly and what should not be funny, but the inability to do anything about it. And last, in our minds, in our memory, and I think last week the importance of memory, the memory of everything that we have done and been, the shame of motives late revealed. When we recognize, in the present when we do things, we give ourselves all of these great and noble excuses and justifications. But age and the approach of death dissolve our justifications as well. The shame of motives late revealed, when we finally are honest with ourselves about why we did the things that we did. And the awareness of things ill done and done to others' harm. So not just the things that we did poorly, that we did to harm others, that we did out of spite, but the things that we did poorly and to injury to others that we took as the exercise of virtue. And what can sting greater than recognizing our own failure, our own moral failure, the actions that we took in the moment with self-righteousness that are revealed in the end as vicious. Then the fool's approval stings. And who's the fool? Everyone. The approval of the entire world is the approval of fools. Because as death approaches, the only measure for our actions is God's measure. And compared to God's judgment, all human judgment is the judgment of fools. So all approval that we receive on earth, by definition, as we approach eternity, is the approval of fools. And Dante craved approval. He recognized his own craving for that. I mean, late in Paradiso, he imagined this different reality in which Florence welcomed him back and crowned him poet laureate. At the end of his life, he was still craving for that approval, even though he knew in the moment how vicious Florence was. Vicious here in the sense of filled with vice. So the approval of fools, the honor that we receive in this world stains us, because worldly honor compared to eternal honors cannot be anything but a blot upon us. And this line, if you're familiar with Murder in the Cathedral, you have to think of the four tempters that appear at the end of Act 1. From wrong to wrong, the exasperated spirit proceeds, reviewing all of our life's action. We review only sin after sin after sin that in the moment we believed was the act of virtue. And then finally, in the last line and a half that Dante speaks here, We have the direction that we need, that we are not doomed to sit on our deathbed with nothing but regret, unless restored by that refining fire, where you must move in measure like a dancer. And this last line and a half is so Dantesque. All of the passages out of Paradiso. And here I'll plug myself that if you haven't read Dante, I will be doing my year-long course in Dante again this fall. In the end of Paradiso, all throughout Paradiso, when Dante is seeing the souls in beatitude, the blessed souls, the souls that experience the vision of God, um, they're described as sparks, as flames that move in a dance. And the dance changes in the various spheres that Dante goes through. But all of heaven for Dante is song and dance. And the dance that Eliot brought up in Burnt Norton at the very beginning, that there's only the dance. If we put ourselves through that refining fire, through the purgatorial fires that purge ourselves of sin, of vice, of our tendency to sin. Once we are refined through fire, then we can move in measure like the dancer. We can become part of that dance. And that, of course, is our end, our telos in Greek, the destiny, that for which we were created, is to be part of the dance. The day was breaking, in the disfigured street he left me, with a kind of valediction, and faded on the blowing of the horn. Here, if we remember, in Hamlet, when Hamlet sees the ghost of his father, the ghost of his father disappears at the same hour of the day, right before dawn. The father disappears on the crowing of the cock. And so here we'll take a pause for a few minutes. If there are any questions, please go ahead, put them in chat or Q&A. And I'll try to stop the information dump momentarily. All right. Moving on then to the third movement. If you're familiar at all with Julian of Norwich, English mystic of the 14th century, Eliot is going to cite her quite clearly. John of the Cross, also, who's been a major figure for Eliot, will appear as well. There are three conditions which often look alike, yet differ completely, flourish in the same hedgerow. Attachment to self and to things and to persons. Detachment from self and from things and from persons. And growing between them indifference, which resembles the others as death resembles life. Being between two lives, unflowered, between the live and the dead metal. This is the use of memory for liberation, not less of love, but expanding of love beyond desire, and so liberation from the future as well as the past. Thus, love of a country begins as attachment to our own field of action, and comes to find that action of little importance, though never indifferent. History may be servitude, history may be freedom. See, now they vanish, the faces and places, with the self which, as it could, loved them, to become renewed, transfigured in another pattern. So our three conditions, which often look alike, but differ completely. So attachment, detachment, and indifference. Attachment was that word that he used in Bert Norton, appetency, which from medieval psychology describes that part of our soul that desires, literally appetites. When we use the word appetite, it almost exclusively refers to desire for food. Occasionally, it can be used figuratively for other things. But if you think about all of the things that you desire, uh, the state of desiring those things is appetency. So attachment to self and things and to persons is appetency. Detachment from self and from things and from person. That is what Eliot has been driving towards, the idea of acting without desire, without a desired outcome. Last week in the third section, he brought up the Bhagavad Gita and Krishna counseling Prince Arjuna. And the lesson of the Bhagavad Gita is that Prince Arjuna must do his duty. Prince Arjuna is preparing for battle, and he's horrified at the thought of the death that he will bring. And he has a crisis of conscience. And Krishna counsels him and explains that as a warrior, this is what his duty is, dharma in the Hindu tradition. And that it's not up to him to decide what he should be doing in life. Rather, it's up to him to try his best at his given lot in life. And Krishna reveals himself as the great god Vishnu. And Arjuna sees Vishnu swallowing up all of the soldiers. And Vishnu, or Krishna, the avatar of Vishnu, explains to Prince Arjuna that all of the soldiers who are going to die have already died. This has already been determined, and that Prince Arjuna is simply the instrument of divine will. So detachment from self and things and persons is the lesson that Arjuna has here that applies to Christianity as well, that you do the proper thing because it is the proper thing, not because you hope to benefit from it or you hope even to bring benefit to others from it. Even when we do acts of charity, we should with a pure conscience because those acts of charity are the right things to do, not because we believe that we will bring benefit to other people. And I have to think here, my brother works for Catholic Charities. He works at the homeless shelter on 48th Street. And one of the things that he quite often sees amongst workers who are simply not going to last is this question of why do we do the things that we do? Working in Catholic Charities, why do you provide meals and shelter to those experiencing homelessness? And you should be doing it out of charity, out of true Christian love. As Christ tells us that whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. But it's very easy to spot the people who will not be able to last in that because their motivation isn't as pure. Their motivation is the belief that they are going to be thanked by people experiencing homelessness who are just going to be absolutely thankful to have shelter, to have a meal, et cetera, et cetera. And these are the people that come in and they just simply don't last very long. And they don't last very long because they have the improper motivation. They want to be thanked. They think that they're improving somebody's life and that that person is going to recognize this and immediately thank them for it. which might sound obvious if you haven't thought much about the situation, but for someone experiencing homelessness, what they have going on in life is probably not going to result in them thanking every single person who scoops out a lunch for them or offers them a blanket. And if you're only offering that blanket or serving that lunch because you want to be thanked, because you want to be thanked by somebody who hopefully is at their lowest point in life, um, the egoism involved in that, if you actually stop and think about it, that somebody needs for their personal fulfillment to receive thanks from somebody in the gutter of life. Um, on the level of what we believe about ourselves, that is just pathetic. But it's also the motive that is not pure. You're not doing something proper because it's the right thing to do. You're doing something because you personally hope to get something out of it. Um, Even in hoping to momentarily improve somebody else's life, there's that desire to be recognized for the help that was extended. I hope that makes sense. It just came to me off the top of my head as I'm reading these lines here. Um, that is attachment to self, even as you're doing the right thing. And as Elliot has talked all about the motive and the purification of the motive. We just had Dante talk about the motives late revealed. When you offered charity, did you offer charity or did you hope to create a scenario in which you personally would be thanked? One of those is attachment to self. Um, Detachment is doing it simply because it is the right thing to do. And between them is indifference. Um, and the indifference here, as explained by one of the commentators, this is smug modernity. It's this fake tranquility, pretending that you are beyond materialism, beyond concern. Um, the modern atheists that like to talk about stoic values, the suggestion that there is no real suffering unless you think it's so. That is just so elitist. I can't imagine. I don't understand why it has such a hold on so many people. Except that it allows them to feel slightly self-righteous about themselves being above everyone else. But indifference, that kind of stoic indifference that becomes popular today, um, the people who pretend to be beyond material concerns, that is far worse than attachment to self and to things and to persons, because the one who's attached to self and things and persons, um, there is something genuine there that just needs to be developed further. But indifference, pretending to have moved beyond attachment, is what that is. Pretending to have detachment while really only having ego. Um, just a beautiful description. It resembles the others as death resembles life. Being between two lives, unflowering, between the live and the dead nettle. And of course, nettles, whether alive or dead, both stink. This is the use of memory for liberation, not less of love, but expanding of love beyond desire. And so liberation from the future as well as the past. So here, if we can take the condition of attachment, recognize it for what it is, and see the moments in our life in which we acted with attachment to self and to things and to persons, we can purify the motive that we have now in the present. And so liberation from the future as well as the past. If the past only holds regret, but not the opportunity for learning, not the opportunity for improvement, then the future, if the past only holds regret, then the future can only be a dreamy state that we're never actually going to approach. But memory, and memory as Eliot is using it, he's not using it in the way that we use memory. Can't describe the way we use memory. So the way that the English mystics and that John of the Cross used memory. Purifying memory is an absolutely necessary step for the mystical union to occur. Anamnesis is the Greek term that refers to the immediate presence of the past that is evoked through detailed representation of the past. So it's not simply recalling and regretting something, but it's bringing the past back in detail, representing the past, recognizing the motives we had in the past, allowing for purification. So it's a memory, it's an exercise that is absolutely a part of it's self-examination, I guess would be the simplest way of putting it. And if we're not attached to our memory, this is the major thing. Can we represent the past to ourselves without protecting our ego by sticking with the justifications of the past? Can we have a detachment in conjuring up the past in our use of memory? If we can do that, then we allow grace. If we can recognize our past motives, we can allow grace in that expands. We understand our past better. We can move beyond the compulsions that motivated us in the past. And we can open ourselves to grace. If we have the grace if through grace we can acknowledge our faults in the past, we can use the past for purification of ourselves in the present. The love of a country, and he's writing this during World War II. Love of a country begins as attachment to our own field of action. The belief that what you are doing personally is so important, and therefore you are so important to the country. But that can transcend into the love of country that goes beyond your significance to the country. And when you do that, then you can recognize your action. And here he's writing this beyond, he's writing this in 1943. So the Blitz is over as he's thinking about his own role during the Blitz. His own individual action can be of little importance when viewed upon from this perspective. The love of country is still a good thing, but it's a good thing on its own, not because he believes his ego, he has some role in it that is important. But it's not indifferent. He's not pretending that the significance of his own action didn't matter in the past. And when we can do this, now they vanish, the faces and places with the self which, as it could, loved them, to become renewed, transfigured in another pattern. A pattern that is not figured by our own ego. Sin is behovely, but all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And that's straight from Julian of Norwich, Revelations of Divine Love, if we're familiar. If I think again of this place, and of people not wholly commendable, of no immediate kin or kindness, but of some peculiar genius, all touched by a common genius, united in the strife which divided them. And this is where the individuals come out as one. And we have both the immediate past of World War II, but now let's recall again the role of St. John's Church in the English Civil War, that this is where Charles I came. And after that, he's arrested and executed, united now in the strife which divided them. And by peculiar genius here, Eliot's using genius in the more Greek sense, not of a towering intellect, but touched by a common the Greek daimon, a particular illuminating spirit. If I think of a king at nightfall, and that king is Charles I, of 3 men and more on the scaffold, and a few who died forgotten in other places, here and abroad, and of one who died blind and quiet, why should we celebrate these dead men more than the dying? So if we think of Charles I, if we think of other royalists who died with him, if we think of Milton, who died blind and quiet, it's caused. Why should we celebrate these dead men more than the dying, more than those who are dying today? What is the role of history in this? It is not to ring the bell backward, nor is it an incantation to summon the specter of a rose, or 200 years before the English Civil War, the War of the Roses. We cannot revive old factions. We cannot restore old policies or follow an antique drum. So the purpose of memory here is not some lovesick antiquarianism, but the past cannot be renewed. These men and those who opposed them and those whom they opposed accept the constitution of silence and are folded into a single party. These men and the Roundheads, the Puritans who persecuted them, and those who are dying today, all are folded into a single party, and that is the dead. We know of some, we don't know of others, but that's earthly fame, which is the approval of fools. But they all share in the inheritance of death. Whatever we inherit from the fortunate, we have taken from the defeated. What they had to leave us, a symbol perfected in death. Whatever we inherit from the fortunate, we have taken from the defeated. What they had to leave us, a symbol perfected in death. And symbol there, its usage throughout church history, symbol also means the creed. That is the statement of belief. The statement of belief of the church. That is something else that they have left to us. A symbol perfected in death. And he spoke earlier about the dead speaking now with a speech purified by fire that they didn't have in life. And all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well, by the purification of the motive in the ground of our beseeching. So the ground of our beseeching, that also is citing Julian of Norwich. The ground of our beseeching is the Lord. Um, so the pure, all manner of things shall be well, all shall be well. The purification of the motive in the ground of our beseeching. We come back to the question of time being redeemed that he put forth in the beginning of Bert Norton. If all time past and past and future is in time present, then all time is irredeemable. But time can be redeemed. How can history be redeemed? In our prayer to the Lord, the purification of the motive. And the purification of the motive can only lead to that barely prayable prayer of the one Annunciation. Fiat mihi, be it done unto me according to thy word. It's only in total submission to the divine will that that time can be redeemed. And only in total submission to the will of God can we look about what otherwise is human history is just a story of sadness and suffering. It can only be redeemed in our total submission to God. The fourth movement, the dove descending breaks the air with flame of incandescent terror, of which the tongues declare the one discharge from sin and error. The only hope, or else despair, lies in the choice of pyre or pyre, to be redeemed from fire by fire. So now we've gone from the dark dove, the German planes with the machine gun fire, flaming tongue, to the dove descending, breaks the air with a flame of incandescent terror, of which the tongues declare the one discharge from sin and error. And incandescent terror. I mean, Pentecost with the Holy Spirit descending. And the disciples suddenly speaking with the Pentecostal tongue that everyone in Jerusalem understands it in its own language. This is not an easy, smiley, happy moment. This is incandescent terror. But here, if we think of terror of the Lord, the terror that is the presence of the Lord, the terror that is God present here in the form of the Holy Spirit, taking the disciples who just a short time ago were broken and fallen and in despair, who have to go and convert the world, and certainly cannot convert the world of their own strength. They can only convert the world when they are reinforced by the Holy Spirit. This can only, we had that phrase last week, the catastrophic Annunciation. And this is what a great poet does, is taking things that we already know about with words that we already know and forging them in such a way that that which has become ordinary, that was extraordinary, can be restored to its extraordinary sense with flame of incandescent terror. Is the description of the Pentecost that can leave us, I hope, with hearts on fire. Words that can strike us with the originality that the first Pentecost had, that through familiarity, it is simply lost for most of us. Lies in the choice of pyre or pyre, to be redeemed from fire by fire. So the two pyres here are that of the Inferno or that of purgatory. That we can only be redeemed from the eternal fire by the temporal purging fire of purgatory. That is our hope. the hope that as twisted, fallen, sinful creatures that we all are, even after our baptism, we continually fall into sin, but all of this still can be redeemed. We can be redeemed from the eternal flames, but only through the flames that purify. Who then devised the torment? Love. Love is the unfamiliar name behind the hands that wove the intolerable shirt of flame, which human power cannot remove. We only live, only suspire, consumed by either fire or fire. So love is the unfamiliar name. The four quartets have been pointing in this direction all the way, um, that God is love. And who devised the torment? Both the eternal torment, but the temporary torment that restores us. The hands that wove the intolerable shirt of flame. In Greek mythology, there are two characters that weave shirts of flames. It appears in the myth of Medea and the myth of Hercules. And in both cases, those shirts are woven with hatred. Medea creates a shirt that consumes the one who puts it on with flames, and they die in agony. And the centaur Nessus, who's killed by Hercules when Nessus tries to abduct Hercules' wife, Diana, creates a shirt a cloak that's made out of his own hide. But when his centaur blood touches Hercules' skin, it will destroy Hercules. And Hercules being semi-divine, this is the only way he can be destroyed. So in the classical world, we have shirts of fire, but they are woven by hatred to bring death. But the shirt of flame, all that Eliot has been moving towards this moment is, what is it to accept the redemption that is available to us? And it is to be burning in every moment with the love of God that impels us to seek purification, to seek the torment of purifying. So the intolerable shirt of flame is what we accept when we accept complete conversion. When we accept the love that God offers us, we gladly accept the shirt of flame that we wear every day, burning in desire for God. And that desire is painful, of course. The mystics do not have an experience of God in which they suddenly get to live here on earth in perfect beatitude. They live here on earth in partial beatitude that is a life of flaming, of the intolerable shirt of flame. For those who listened to my lecture on Saint Juliana of Liège, Saint Juliana, who had the vision throughout her life, visions given to her by Christ, described the visions as torment to her friend Eve. Physical torment that endured her entire life and cut her life short. That is what it is to live the partial beatitude that the mystics can have here on earth. The intolerable shirt of flame which human power cannot remove. We only live, only suspire, consumed by either fire or fire. And this is going to go over, of course, but we're 3 lectures beyond it going over. So we will pause for just a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes, perhaps, before we go on to the 5th movement, which is both the finale for Little Gidding, but also for the 4 quartets as a whole. It's a double finale. Okay, so our last finale for Little Gidding, for the four quartets, and for the Catholic imagination that we've gone forth on this year. What we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. And of course, we're going to have a reflection on poetry here. And for every poet, there is no such thing as a final draft. To finalize a poem is simply to give oneself a new starting point. Deeply ironic since Eliot stopped writing poetry after this. Uh, but for him personally, of course, this is a jumping off point, the last part of his life. And every phrase and sentence that is right, where every word is at home, taking its place to support the others, the word neither diffident nor ostentatious, an easy commerce of the old and the new, the common word exact without vulgarity, the formal word precise but not pedantic, the complete consort dancing together. And here again, we have, why does he talk about poetry so much? Why does Dante talk about writing poetry so much? Why does Petrarch talk about writing poetry so much? Um, and it's because their conception of poetry is just so much grander than ours. I should have asked at the beginning of this, what does poetry mean to you? And unless you have a love of literature and you've immersed yourself into poetry, what poetry is in the modern world is just the ungrammatical prose spewed forth in an emotional moment. Certainly not what it was to anybody else. I mean, Eliot said at one point that the purpose of poetry is to protect us from emotional outburst. That poetry is where you take these ideas and you refine them. And so the poet, as the make place this in Greek, is simply to create. The poet T.S. Eliot, Dante, Petrarch, in doing their craft, are doing their best to emulate God in creating something, where every word is at home, where everything supports everything else, not diffident, not ostentatious. The common is not vulgar, the formal is not pedantic, the complete consort dancing together. In case we had missed it, here Eliot explains what it is, that his poem is his creation. And his creation as a poem should strives to have that same beautiful pattern and arrangement that God's creation does. God created a beautiful, intricate world. And if anything, modern science is simply driving this point further and further home, how incredibly exact the specifications of the physical universe are, where it could not exist. Uh, the incredibly narrow parameters for the various forces that hold everything together. The window in which they exist is so incredibly small that we see exactly what the ancients saw in the cosmos, something created with an absolute perfection of order, the complete concert dancing together. Eliot has hoped to create the poem in which the words dance together as the created universe dances in God's creation. Every phrase and every sentence is an end and a beginning. Every poem an epitaph. And any action is a step to the block, to the fire, down the sea's throat, or to an illegible stone. And that is where we start. We die with the dying. See, they depart and we go with them. We are born with the dead. See, they return and bring us with them. The moment of the rose and the moment of the yew tree are of equal duration. So the rose that blooms for just a few days, and is that symbol. And for someone who loves Dante as much as Eliot does, the rose is both something ephemeral by earthly time, but it's Dante's image of heaven. When Dante goes into the presence of God in the Empyrean heaven, in Paradiso 30, it's in the form of a celestial rose. And the moment of the yew tree, and the yew tree, of course, is that tree that marks English cemeteries and signifies bodily death. The moment in the rose and the moment of the yew tree are of equal duration. A people without history is not redeemed from time, for history is a pattern of timeless moment. So the idea of modernism, to ignore all history, the idea of people to say the past doesn't matter, context doesn't matter, all that matters is today. Um, to accept that is to accept irredeemable time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments, those moments of sudden illumination in which we are joined ever so briefly to God, that we experience eternity ever so briefly in whatever limited sense that we get in those timeless moments that occur regularly throughout the passage of time, that unite us to our past, that unite us to the future, because we know that there will be those who come after us experiencing the same timeless moments we have had. A people without history, a people incapable of acknowledging past and future, cannot be redeemed from time because they have no connection to the past and history that provides the pattern of timeless moments that is our interfacing with God, as it were. So while the light fails on a winter's afternoon in a secluded chapel, history is now and England. So as dusk ends and light fails, his particular timeless moment is now in England in Little Gidding at St. John's Church. But it connects to every other timeless moment ever experienced in all of salvation history, because that is the point. History, human history, is the pattern of timeless moments. With the drawing of this love and the voice of this calling. And what exactly is this line doing? It leads into the second part. And here we have two parts of the fifth movement. The first part is the conclusion of Little Gidding, and the second part is the conclusion of all of the four quartets and Eliot's entire poetic career. And he's very intentionally printed it this way, with this one line hanging, without any punctuation at the end. With the drawing of this love and the voice of this call. And here he's citing another mystical work, The Cloud of Unknown, a 14th century work written by a master for the novice, trying to instruct the novice on this mystical path, the negative path towards God. The Cloud of Unknowing is just one of those masterpieces of spiritual guidance. And it stresses the via negativa, the way of approaching God by acknowledging that there's nothing that you know that can possibly could be compared to God. We have to approach God in the darkness, the negation of everything positively we can think of. And there's a line in The Call of Unknown that says, "What a weary and wretched heart, indeed, is one fast asleep in sloth, which is not awakened by the drawing power of his love and the voice of his calling." And sloth, or sloth, one, probably the most misunderstood vice. What it meant to the mystics, what it meant to the monks, is not at all what it's thought of today as laziness, or sometimes depression. And it's not either at all. It ended up being sort of co-opted by the horrible industrial age movement that we now live in of total work, total productivity, that every second of your day needs to be spent productively towards some goal that is your life. Those cell phones that you have where your boss can contact you 24/7. The schedule that is created by the company that you have no control of whatsoever. That world is the one that picked up the ancient sin of acedia, which in Greek means carelessness, without care, and turned it into an industrial sin for an industrial Christian age that is laziness. What acedia meant originally is spiritual sadness. And Thomas Aquinas defined it really, really well. Because Thomas Aquinas, that's just what he does, is define things very clearly. Achadia is spiritual sadness. It is the vice of one who does not find the joy in accepting the grace and love offered by God. The grace and love offered by God is the source of what Thomas calls gaudium, which is actual joy, as opposed to like the happiness that you get from fleeting pleasures. So achadia is the vice of not being able to fully accept God's love because one fears what one has to give. To fully embrace God's love is not to try to find satisfaction, is not to try to find satisfaction and fulfillment through those things, those ill-intended, misused, misdirected loves, those attachments that we have. To accept God's love requires detachment. Because as he's going to say, we cannot accept God's love half-heartedly. The sacrifice required by this is to sacrifice everything else. Not that we abandon earth, we abandon creatures, we abandon people, but we view them from the standpoint of eternity as other creations. We have to embrace God completely. And achadia is the vice of not wanting to be fully wrapped up in the love of God. The drawing of his love and the calling of his voice. When we can't accept that completely, we're guilty of achadia. So that's the whole section that Eliot is quoting. But he's taking if he doesn't quote the bit about the heart that is weary and wretched indeed, because it isn't caught up in this. If we can accept this full calling and the implications of the full calling with the drawing of this love and the voice of this calling, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time through the unknown, remembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning, and the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall, and the children in the apple tree, all references to previous moments in Four Quartets. Not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard in the stillness between two waves of the sea. Quick now, here, now, always. A condition of complete simplicity. And the total acceptance of God's love is complete simplicity. There is nothing else. The heart that accepts that has literally everything that the heart can want. However, costing not less than everything. It is simple, but it is difficult. And one has to think of G.K. Chesterton's line that Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and not tried. You can't use that. Okay, it's difficult because it costs everything. You have to completely reorder all of your loves according to the love of God first. A condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Just a second. All manner of things shall be well when the tongues of flame are enfolded into the crowned knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one. Daddy, I can't find the And that is it. So this is our final image that Eliot leaves us with here, is that this is the redeeming of time, is the absolute acceptance of the will and the love of God. But it costs all of those attachments that we're so loath to give up. But all shall be well. All of history, all of the horrors of history, will not be less horrible, but will be seen to be partial, as he said in the first part. When the tongues of flame, when the spirit is enfolded into the crowned knot of fire. And you have to think here of Dante's image of divinity in Paradiso 33, of the flaming serpent. Just a second. And the fire and the rose are one. The fire that is God's love, the fire that is what purifies us. And the rose that is, that ephemeral moment in time, but also the celestial rose, heaven. The fire that purifies us. And beatitude itself. All of that becomes one. So thank you very much. That's the end of tonight. That's the end of the four quartets. That is kind of sadly the end of this entire year. I will send out this recording. Thank you all so much for the year. You want to say bye-bye, girls? Bye. We'll end on that.